Boldwood presents Treaty of Blood, written by Michael Jecks and read by John Telfer. Blood and destruction shall be so in use, and dreadful objects so familiar, that mothers shall but smile when they behold their infants quartered with the hands of war. Cry havoc, and let slip the dogs of war. Julius Caesar, by William Shakespeare. Book 1. Prologue, July the 15th, 1359. In the valley it was still warm, the heat of the day radiating from the rocks and the ground at his feet, for all that it was deep night. The moon was a mere sliver, giving so little light that he was as good as invisible in the murk. Certainly his victim, snoring, did not see him, as Hardwin crept forward. He had already unsheathed his dagger, and now he gripped it in his hand, the dulled blade barely discernible as he made his way with extreme caution over the soft grasses to the sleeping figure. The bag of gold, containing the proceeds of the last month's plunder, was cradled in the crook of the sergeant's elbow. All the money that the company had stolen was lying there in the little sack, ready to be taken. Hardwin was going to have it tonight, and no one was going to stop him. It was his by rights. As he approached the figure lying fast asleep with the money, Hardwin remembered the insults he had received, the sneers, the jibes, the humiliation, all at the hand of this man, Sergeant Geoffrey. He had accused Hardwin of keeping more than his share of the loot, money he was entitled to. The sergeant had taken it all, saying Hardwin didn't deserve anything since he had tried to hold back on his companions, and they had beaten him cruelly, thinking he was guilty of stealing from the common hoard. His anger at those memories made his hand shake with rage, pure and unadulterated. He detested this man, and he would exact his revenge. Hardwin knelt at his side. He wouldn't attack while Geoffrey was asleep. No, he wanted his victim to see him, to recognize his doom, the bringer of his death. Hardwin smiled, his belly contracting with delight, although he refused to allow the giggling to pass his lips. He held the dagger's point over his sergeant's eye and slapped his other hand over the man's mouth. "Wakey, wakey," he whispered. Like any mercenary in France, Geoffrey woke instantly. War meant men slept uneasily, lightly, only to waken at the slightest sound, and at the touch of Hardwin's hand the eyes opened, at first confused, then angry, and finally fearful. Hardwin smiled. "Told you I wouldn't forget," he said, and pressed the blade's tip down while the body thrashed briefly, until Geoffrey was still, the dagger implanted in his brain. Chapter 1, October the 25th. When the bell rang, he woke in a frenzy of panic. All at once the terror was with him again, all-consuming, overwhelming. The smell of burning, the screams and cries of the dying, clashes of steel against steel and the slap of weapons against bare flesh, the crackle of artillery, the whinnying of petrified horses, all conspired to urge him to rise, to reach for his sword, and to go and assist the guards defending, to oppose the men storming the town, to drive off this new threat before they could gain a foothold on the walls or reach the gates and throw them wide to the invaders. He jerked, rolling from his cot, scrabbling for his sword, and when he was grabbed by the shoulder, he turned and punched out, still in the nightmare of his confusion. "Brother!" He whirled, seeking this new threat, fists bunched, ready to sell his life dearly. "Brother Berenger!" Berenger Fripper came to himself, shivering, as another brother held his hands up in sign of surrender, and he saw the figure squirming on the slabs of the floor, trying to stem the flow of blood from his nose. "Oh, Brother Kenred," he mumbled, "I am so sorry." William of Fernshill, Esquire, stood yawning and stretching in the early dawn light. It was A curiously familiar landscape, low hills in the distance, rolling grassed plains and thick woods and forests, while dotted here and there were small hamlets, an occasional village or town, each with its own little blue column of smoke rising in the cool air. Yes, this could have been the view towards Crediton from his father's home at Fernshill near Cadbury. Seeing this countryside made him feel at home, comfortable, secure. At least it would if it were not for the noise, because the men of the host were stirring. It was 2 years since he had arrived here in France. He had come with visions of vast fortunes to be made. Sir John de Sully from Iddesleigh, who had served the Prince of Wales for years, had spoken of the glorious battle at Crécy, the capture of Calais, and more recently, the victory at Poitiers. He told of courage, of winning against apparently insuperable odds, of the bold English and Welsh archers, and how they fought for the king with such determination and enthusiasm that even if the French outnumbered the English by 4 or 5 to 1, it was considered an equal battle. Certainly, since Will had arrived with his friend Perkin at every battle bar one short ambush, which was swiftly reversed, they had more or less easily won against stronger forces. Of course, that was a record that could very quickly change. It would take only a few errors from a commander for a battle to swing from success to disaster. The English were fortunate to have in their company many strong, capable commanders who could seize opportunities as they were presented. But although Will had expected to be involved in thrilling deeds and feats of arms, the fact was that he had yet to earn his fortune. It was frustrating. Just now he had a total of 6 florins to his name. Perhaps he should suggest to his companion Perkin that they should leave this party and ally themselves to another band, where the potential loot would be increased. But the larger the band, the more men among whom any profits must be shared. It was a difficult calculation, assessing which was the best option. All he knew was there must be opportunities he was missing. Even now horns were sounding, and Will kicked his friend's foot. "Come on, Perkin. Time to be up." "Brother Berenger," the abbot said, "walk with me." "Abbot, I'm so very sorry. I was dreaming. A mare had me, and when he touched my shoulder—" "I understand, Brother Berenger. All knew you were having a nightmare, which is why they went to calm you. But this has to end. You broke Kenred's nose when you punched him. He is only very young, and the idea that he might be pounded for trying to calm you when you were in such a terrible state has made the entire daughter concerned for their safety. I don't know why the dreams came again. Do you not?" Abbot Richard did not need to meet Berenger's glance. His ascetic features under the thin, mousy hair turning grey with the pressures of his position stared ahead at the church that dominated the cloister. "And yet you know what you did in France, do you not? When you hear the ringing of the bell at night, you do not immediately think of the service of matins. You think of rapine and danger." "Yes," Berenger admitted, but unapologetically. He could not help how his mind turned when he heard the bells tolling. "I do not know what you did in the king's service overseas, and I do not need to know. That is between you and God. You are here, so you said, to atone for your sins, and to do so it makes sense for you to have residence here in a house of God. But if you become an impediment to our continued duties, I will have to consider your future here." Berenger felt the words like a lash, although they had been murmured in the abbot's gentle, kindly tone, and the injustice of the comment stung. I don't know what I can do. If a mare plants an evil dream in my mind, there is little I can do about it." "You must pray, brother. Pray that God might send you dreamless sleep. The horrors of war are, I am sure, intolerable for a man's mind. You will have to try to put them behind you, to seek his peace. Else your future here in a house of the Lord must be in doubt." Berenger clenched his jaw. The man was right. He had no idea what Berenger had lived through during his service in King Edward's forces. Abbot Richard Ashe had spent his life in prayer and study, and then joined the monastery. His entire life had been devoted to the service of God. He had lived behind the walls of monasteries in the safe, peaceful lands of England. His monastic homes had never been attacked, and he had not seen his brother monks grabbed by their robes and beaten, or seen them have their throats cut. He had no idea of the horror of life in France. Berenger did. He had run, his sword in hand, at enemy forces, waiting at every instant for the moment that an arrow or quarrel would slam into his belly. He had woken in the middle of the night to learn that enemy forces were almost upon him and his men. He had joined the king's armies and willingly stood in the ranks during massed battles. And he had seen his family die in Calais during the onslaught of the plague. His soul had been wrenched in two by all that he had seen and done. Now all he wanted was peace, but the memories, the experiences, remained as scars in his mind. Abbot Richard continued, but Berenger was not listening. His mind was fixed on the injustice of it all. He couldn't help responding as he did when the bell tolled in the middle of the night. It was an automatic reaction. He had been attuned to danger and threats, and the fact that he was now in a safe environment did not erase that. It was too deeply embedded in his soul. Perhaps it always would be. Will's trepidation increased as they approached the village, warily looking about him for any signs of danger. He was at the tip of the spear, Perkin at his side, Dogbreath on his right, the rest of the company behind them as they stepped cautiously towards the cluster of buildings. The company had been moving along the road when Fulk saw the cottages and brought them to Robin's attention. Fulk, the tall, proud mountain man from the cantons, was never one to bypass a threat. He said, "It's better to see a threat and meet it than go round and risk enemy attacking later." It made sense, but Will still felt the cloying, thickening sensation in his throat, the feeling of a hollow belly, the tightening of his scalp at the thought of action. Not exactly fear, but certainly not calmness. Others, such as Robin, the master archer, had more experience of battle and displayed no fear. Fulk himself, with his great halberd, was impervious to fear. Dogbreath, the constantly moaning, scrawny fighter who acted like a berserker in a battle, was an emotional void. Dismounted, Will stepped carefully onwards, his feet scuffing on the loose soil and twigs of the path, eyes flitting from side to side. There was a clatter, a gleam of steel, and a man shouted. Will felt his stomach clench like a fist to see the first missile. "Where?" he bellowed as the second shaft flew towards them. "Crossbows!" Behind him he heard Robin shout to dismount, and suddenly the air was filled with the whistle and howl of fletchings as the company loosed arrows at the village. For Will, that was not enough. Ducking his head down, he pelted forwards, barely aware of the occasional crossbow quarrel, the arrows returning in the opposite direction, until he fetched up against a wall, safely below the parapet, panting like a greyhound after a hare, his stomach churning. Perkin slammed down at his side, frowning as a bolt snicked off the topmost stone and whizzed away like an angry mosquito. "These bastards seem serious," he said. Will dare not speak. His blood was thundering in his veins and in his head, and he wanted to vomit. He swallowed the bile and pointed. At a fast crouch, the two ran along the line of the wall until they reached a small shore, whence they could peer into the village. "I see 3 houses," Perkin said. "Yes." Will led the way at a swift pace, down an old sheep track, and around to the rear of the buildings. He swore as an English arrow almost struck his shoulder, but held his tongue, flinching. Then they were off again, running quietly to the rear wall of the nearer cottage, where they paused again, gathering their breath. At the farther side of the next cottage he saw Fulk and Dogbreath, both glowering wildly at the impertinence of Frenchmen trying to delay their passage. As they reached the door, 3 men ran from the cottage before them, and Fulk swung his halberd, all but decapitating the first. Dogbreath closed with a second, his sword flashing wildly, while Fulk hamstrung the third, then brained him just as Dogbreath thrust his sword deep into his opponent's belly and wrenched the blade sideways, spilling the man's guts all over his thighs and sweeping back to cut his throat before he could cry out. And then Will and Perkin were in the nearer cottage. There were two men at a window. Will felt a curious elation, as though this was what he had come here for. He bellowed a war cry and charged. The nearer fellow yelped with terror and threw himself backwards against the nearest wall, petrified, while the other appeared frozen. To Will, it looked as though both were preparing to launch themselves at him, and he rushed at them, his sword raised, and as he did so there was a loud scream. Will turned to see a woman and thought she was attacking him, but Perkin shouted, "No, Will! She's no danger! Will! Will! She's no threat!" Will gazed at him, disbelieving, then turned back to the cowering woman with her children. "Thanks, Perkin. Thanks," he muttered. The family was treated with a rough kindness, Perkin bundling the trio outside and into Toby's hands. This new recruit was younger and wore an expression of perpetual confusion. An unknown element in the company, he had been given responsibility for the young boys used by the company, away from the more aggressive actions. Will and Perkin left the trio with him and hurried to the next cottage. Inside were two men who had been loosing crossbows steadily at the English company. One had loosed a bolt at Fulk, who killed both with a sweep of his halberd, the sharp axe-head taking one head off completely before stabbing the second with his sharp lance-head. They were both peasants from their appearance, but from the way that they had loosed their crossbows they were experienced in fighting, perhaps survivors of Poitiers or one of the other battles in the last years. Only when they were dead had Fulk heard the voice calling. When he investigated, he found that there was a deep pit dug near the cottage with a grill over the top, and a man was crying out for help from far below. Fulk and Saul lifted the metal away and were helping the man to climb out when Will and Perkin reached him. He was a man of medium height, with a scrap of mousy-coloured hair shaved to stubble at the sides in a form of reverse tonsure. His voice had the flat tones of a man of the Midlands, and he looked about him in the sunlight like he'd been blinded. "You're all English?" he asked, eyes narrowed. "Aye, we're God's own," Dogbreath said. "Some of us may be," Saul said cynically, glancing at Dogbreath. "Piss on you," Dogbreath returned. "Who are you?" Robin asked the man. "I'm called Hardwin," the man said, and he smiled thinly. Fearing more French, they were soon on their way again, Hardwin hobbling on legs unused to activity. He had been held in there for 3 days, without space to lie down or even sit in comfort. "What were you doing there?" Robin asked. "I was with a company and got separated," Hardwin said. "Those murderous bastards caught me and stuck me in that chamber without food or drink. They were going to kill me, I think, leaving me there to starve to death." He glanced about the company. Some of the men looked at him without interest, while others appeared to view him with suspicion. That was natural enough. This was a land at war, after all. But Hardwin felt safe at last. He had not expected to be released. After the Frenchmen had caught him, he knew his luck had run out. They would be sure to kill him. It was a miracle that they had held him after catching him. But now his gold was all taken. One of his captors had taken his sack of money and run off with it, perhaps to report that they had captured an Englishman on his own with money. No doubt a party of French officials were even now on their way to torture and kill him. These men had saved him, and they looked like a strong force where he would be safe. And then he realized. He recognized Robin. The two boys were lifted into the wagon with the other boys. Their mother was told to walk alongside. With her boys held, she would be unlikely to bolt, after all, and if she wanted food, she would have to cooperate with the company. She may have uses as a marching wife, But more useful were these boys who would be employed bringing arrow sheaves, food or water to the men in battle, helping fetch and carry in camp, and generally working as servants. Toby nodded to Henri, an orphan the company had adopted the previous year. "Henri, calm them down. Tell them they're safe here, if they do as they're told." Will heard Henri speaking kindly to the woman, telling her that she would be safe enough, and so would her boys. "She doesn't look happy," Perkin commented. "Would you? She's probably been told that her boys would be skinned alive and eaten by English," Will said. "War is no place for women. At least she'll be happy to know her boys won't starve." He and Perkin had been through the houses in search of food or drink, but as usual there was little to be found. A small store of apples, most of which had gone rotten, a half of dried sausage, a hardened crust of bread, but no real plunder. Dog Breath, meanwhile, had rifled the bodies of dead crossbowmen, seeking easy pickings, all to no avail. They fired the houses as they rode away, and Will was struck by the wailing of the two boys and their mother's tears. They were only hovels, after all. "I could do with a thick stew," Perkin said wistfully. Will nodded sadly. "Yes, a steamed sausage with thick sauce, kale and peas or beans, and then a pie filled with apples and cloves. Oh, I can almost taste it." They had settled in a group of empty buildings for the night, and instead we have oats and dry meats, Perkin said mournfully. "Aye, you should be glad," Dog Breath sneered. "There's been times we'd have been glad to eat our boots." "Not yours," Robin called from the other side of the yard, to general sniggering. "Anyone else's, but not yours." Dog Breath scowled fiercely. "Oh, aye. Any man daring such a perilous experiment would die a hideous death on the instant." "At least my boots are quality," Dog Breath snarled. "They were valuable." "Before you took 'em, yes," Robin said agreeably. "When you stole them from the last owner, they were no doubt wonderful. Your old ones had almost disintegrated." "They had holes in them." "Yes, and the new ones are despairing of their existence because of the odour of your feet." "Oh, that's not fair," Gervais said, shaking his head in admonishment. "It's his general odour that makes them despair, not only his feet. That's just one of the worst aspects." "I don't smell more than you," Dog Breath protested. "We can't smell anything other than you," Robin pointed out reasonably. Will chuckled, all thoughts of hardship driven away by the camaraderie of these new friends. It was strange, he reflected. These men were from all backgrounds, united by nothing more than mutual dependence. Some had been outlaws, some like him, the sons of knights whose older brothers inherited and left them destitute and in search of money. Some were naturally drawn to the life of a soldier, others too foolish to realize the dangers of such a life. Men like Dog Breath, who rarely expressed a coherent thought, but who was utterly reliable in battle, whether with his bow, his long knife, or his fists. Then there were others like Saul from Plymouth, the sharp, wiry seaman who had deserted the waves for more lucrative employment, and who considered the risks of death on land to be roughly equivalent to the dangers of the sea. Ulrich, who was so reluctant to discuss his background. Tobias, a recent addition to the company, who had the arrogance of a moneylender. Seth, who often complained of missing his woman. Peter of Reading, who had given up a tedious existence working as a glover's apprentice. This company had many different men, all with their own ambitions and reasons for joining. Many were escaping, accepting a life of hardship rather than a short rope at the hanging tree. It made him glance at the man they had rescued today. Hardwin sat keeping himself to himself, eating greedily, which was hardly surprising since he had been starved, but there was something about him that Will found curious. It was there in the way he didn't join in with the general conversation, but instead shot little glances at the men about him, especially Robin. Perhaps it was just insecurity, nervousness around all these men, but it gave Will pause. He would calm down after a while, no doubt. Chapter 2. Robin himself was watching the woman with her boys. Toby was sitting with them, and his gentle manner seemed to reassure her, but Robin was concerned that she might try to take advantage of his innocence and youthful appearance to escape. It was no real concern if she did. Robin didn't particularly want to keep her. Women who were willing partners for the man and wanted to march with them were one thing, but a woman who was unwilling to share the men's bedrolls could soon cause trouble. And Robin was the commander of a Vintaine of some 15 men. He didn't want friction. In a force of fighters like this, there were all too many risks of that. An ill-considered remark, an accidental insult, and all too often a knife could be drawn and a useful member of the company lost. They had all known similar stories: too much ale, a brawl, a dagger, a death, and sentence of death. Robin himself was here for that reason. Except that it was different for him. Others had the fatalism of the truly poor and lacked the boundaries that Robin felt. He had been bound by his oaths and his appreciation of his position, where the others had been living from day to day without giving any thought to the consequences of their actions, until the fateful day when they were found over a dead body, or with their hands gripping a stolen purse, or— well, the reasons were endless. Thus many of the men found themselves here because they had been given the chance to redeem themselves in King Edward's armies. Murderers, fraudsters, and other felons were here to escape a noose. But Robin had not been caught. He was here because of a crime he regretted deeply, feeling the dishonor of his act, and although he managed to conceal it most of the time, occasionally it all came back to him. The fight, the knife, the blood, the guilt. Yes, it was shameful. Yes, he felt the guilt. He would never lose it. Saul looked over at Hardwin. "Perhaps you should tell us your story, eh? How did you end up here in France?" "Me? I was one of the first to come. I was in the front ranks at Crécy, I was," Hardwin said. "Interesting," said Ulrich. "What's that mean?" Hardwin could not help his quick reaction. He must control his suspicion at comments made about him. "Nothing. Just we've been in the same company since then and never saw you. Who was your banneret?" "I doubt you know him," Hardwin said, and wouldn't be drawn. Shortly afterwards the rest of the men drew away from him imperceptibly. Tobias did not seem to notice, but that was no surprise. He didn't have Hardwin's experience and nous. He wouldn't notice if they struck him on the pate. No, he guessed that Toby was also a latecomer. The two were strangers to the others. That was good. It made Toby a natural ally. They would have to keep together, Hardwin thought to himself. He disliked that Ulrich. There was something about him that rubbed him the wrong way, rather like Robin. He didn't trust either of them. But Robin could be profitable. Hardwin was sure he recognized him. All that day, Berenger was careful to be solicitous towards his victim. "I'm very sorry, brother. It was my dreaming, you understand. I didn't realize it was you." Kenred was as understanding as a man with a nose swollen to the size and color of a plum could be. At least, he indicated, the bleeding had stopped. The infirmary had used ice and medicaments to ease the pain, with varying success. Berenger left the table with the other monks as they filed from the refectory and out to the cloister. He had work to perform in the gardens. Not having learned his letters, he was of little use in the scriptorium, but his strength and doggedness marked him out as a useful lay brother. He had come here after Poitiers, asking the abbot for the opportunity to stay at the abbey for a matter of weeks, but in reality he had been hoping for this, to remain here as a lay brother. He was not scared of work, and here there was work aplenty. Many of the buildings were in a state of disrepair, with roofs missing slates or thatch, paths overrun with weeds, and wood rotting in door and window frames. Berenger was not a skilled carpenter, but he was keen, and soon he was recognized as an asset. If only he didn't suffer nightmares. He had endured too much in France, as he told those monks who asked, not that he ever spoke of his wife. The plague had taken everything from him, and he hoarded the memories of family life like a miser, unwilling to share even a groat's worth with anyone. He was walking out from the refectory when it happened. A kick from behind caught his ankle, and he tripped and fell. All at once another man was on him, a knee on the small of his back, and he heard Brother Mark whisper in his ear, "You think you can beat Kenred and not find the debt repaid?" Berenger knew Mark. It was obvious to all that Mark preyed on other monks. In an environment where there were no women, it was unsurprising that some would turn to others in the community for affection. However, at that moment, Berenger was not thinking of Mark or the suspicion he had held against the brother. He was consumed with rage. In his time, Berenger had been a member of the men marching to Crécy, the next year laying siege to Calais, and still later he had joined Prince Edward in the Grand Chevauchée to Poitiers. In his time he had endured many attacks. Mercenaries, Frenchmen, even allies had attempted to kill him in ambushes by dropping rocks on him or loosing quarrels at him or confronting him in hand-to-hand combat. Today, as soon as he felt his foot kicked away and fell, he prepared to defend himself, and as Mark spoke, Berenger put his fists to the floor and pushed himself bodily up and over to roll. The maneuver was sudden enough to surprise Mark, who found himself flung away. He landed on his side, and before he could appreciate what had happened, his throat was clutched in two hands with a grip as firm as a metalsmith's pincers. "I said to Kenred that I was sorry," Berenger hissed, "and I was. But if you attack me again," he said, leaning down so his nose almost touched Mark's, "I will cut your liver out and eat it, and I'll enjoy it." October the 29th. The news came as a thunderbolt to the men. Robin was the lead rider that day once more. Hawkwood tended to rotate the Vintaine's positions in the little force, and today Robin was scouting ahead. They were close to a small village, and he had trotted a little farther in advance once more as the land fell away from them. And as trees cleared, and they could see for some leagues, he chose to hurry on and see whether there were obvious dangers or opportunities in the land they were approaching. The woman who had unburdened herself so far as to admit to being named Agnès walked with her sons at the side of one of the carts under the watchful eyes of Toby and Gervase, along with three other women who had previously decided to join the company as marching wives. He doubted this new woman would also agree to provide comfort to the men. Since she had not been murdered and her boys with her, she had lost her terror, and now there was only a fierce rage and hatred in her face when she caught Robin's eye. If she refused to participate in the well-being of the company, they would have to kill her. Otherwise, she might attempt to rescue the boys again, and that could not be allowed. Then again, the company did not want recalcitrant boys with them. If they were to see their mother killed, it would hardly endear them to the company. He put her and the boys, Olivier and Artaud, from his mind. At his side just now was Henri, the boy whom they had adopted into their company some months before. He had proved to be a useful fellow. In battle, boys like him were used to support the archers, running errands, bringing sheaves of arrows, water, and anything else needed by the men. Now, gazing ahead, he saw a trio of riders pelting along towards him at breakneck pace. He snapped an order for his men to disperse amid the undergrowth at either side of the track. These men might constitute a threat, but he saw no indication of pursuit or any other groups that might endanger the company. He sent Henri to warn the rest of the company before walking his beast a little forward and resting his elbows on his saddle's pommel, waiting. Hardwin called, "What is it?" And even as Robin cast a fierce glare over his shoulder, he saw Peter throw his hand over the man's mouth to silence him. Robin turned his attention back to the approaching men. It was always good to capture riders. Sometimes they might be carrying useful information, telling of storehouses or rich houses suitable to be plundered. Often they were aware of other groups of men in the area and could give notice of possible risks. He walked his horse slowly along the roadway, a solitary rider posing little threat. There was no obvious danger on the way ahead. The three rode more warily upon spying Robin. At such times, all those undertaking any journeys must be suspicious. There were too many mercenaries wandering France and stealing whatever they wanted for anyone to be anything other than cautious, even when the danger appeared slight. Robin hailed them in French, and the man at their fore replied in the same tongue, wishing him Godspeed. "Where do you come from, friend?" Robin asked. "Are there routiers back that way?" "No, I've seen no mercenaries. You rode in great haste. I have need of urgency. What of your path? Is it dangerous?" the man asked suspiciously. As he spoke, there came a tumult from behind Robin. Agnes suddenly cried out that he should flee, that these were English mercenaries, and they would kill him and his companions. Robin smiled as the man and his companions, startled, made as if to flee. Before they could, Dogbreath and Fulk emerged from the trees behind the rider, bows ready bent. "It might be dangerous, friend, but I don't think you need to worry about routiers behind us." "Are you English?" the man demanded. Robin shrugged. "Most of us." "Thanks be to God. I thought you were French." Robin nodded. "Who are you?" "Adam of Barton. I am a king's messenger," the man said as he dismounted, rubbing his backside. His two companions followed suit, and Robin climbed from his mount and squatted at the verge while others from the company joined them to listen. "You're a messenger?" "I have urgent messages. The Dauphin and his advisers refused to provide their king's ransom, and now Charles of Navarre has committed himself and his men to support the Dauphin, the duplicitous bastard. With Charles's men, the Dauphin can assault King Edward's holdings. His castles and fortresses are endangered. So our king has assembled a force to make the Dauphin to accede to his demands." Hawkwood had joined them. "King Edward is coming with more troops." "Yes, a huge force, 10,000 strong. He intends to force the French to submit." Hawkwood nodded slowly while the men of the company drew in their breaths, grinning and exchanging excited glances at the thought of a fresh war. A new army. That meant fresh spoils of war, plunder and profit. This was what the men had come here for. "That is good to hear," Ulrich said, smiling broadly. "We can join the king's host and take part in the fighting, can't we? There'll be more plunder with his forces than here on our own." "We could," Hawkwood said as the messenger and his companions reluctantly returned to their mounts, all moving with the air of men who had already spent too many hours in the saddle. Once they were out of earshot, Hawkwood continued. "But if we stay south of the king's forces, we can distract any French forces planning to contest his route." "He may be disagreeably disposed to us if we don't join him," Soyle pointed out. "Why don't we join him? What's the worry? If we go to the king, we'll be part of a large company, and safer for all that," Dogbreath said. "True enough," Hawkwood said patiently. "If we go to the king's side, we should be part of that larger force. So if we capture a knight or valuable burgess, we would be able to share our good fortune with the king, wouldn't we?" "Aye," Dogbreath said distractedly. He was studying his boots with a scowl. "My boot's cracking. You'd think no one knew how to make boots in this country." Ulrich was nodding. "Yes, with the king we stand more chance of catching a noble and ransoming him." "Of course, Ulrich, but if we don't join the king and capture a nobleman or wealthy merchant, we wouldn't have to share the ransom," Hawkwood explained. "The king might be annoyed if we ignore his summons," Robin said. Dogbreath looked up from his cracked boots. "I don't want the king to see me as a deserter." "He won't," Hawkwood said. He was definite. "If we go about matters in our own way, we will be disrupting the French forces. That will help the king, and he'll appreciate our efforts to harry his enemies. And there is another aspect to all this." "What?" Will said. He and Perkin had joined the Council of War, and now he stood at Fulk's side in the roadway. "Think, if the Dauphin is planning to fight, he'll need an army. That will mean he must collect money. To do that, he will have to send men all over the country with strong boxes to gather up all the gold he can. All the regions will have to supply money to the Dauphin." "What of it?" Will asked. Hawkwood sighed and closed his eyes momentarily at Will's obtuseness. "Do you want to make money? Is that why you are here in France? Where is that money to be taken most easily?" Will felt he was being interrogated. Worse, he was being treated like a foolish child. "Well, in large towns, in cities, in churches and abbeys, in the strong boxes of the servants of the Dauphin as they collect taxes to pay for a new army, as they carry that money from the provinces all the way to Paris and the Louvre, or to the Dauphin's treasury, wherever it may be. Just think of it," Hawkwood said, his eyes glittering as he rose to his feet and confronted the men all about him. "Tax collectors even now are gathering all the money they can, and as they do, they sling it all into large chests so that they can transport it safely. All we have to do is think about the places where money is to be collected, work out where it will be carried, and capture the men and the money, and we'll all be rich. Not only will we win more than we could by serving under the king, we will also be aiding his campaign by denuding the French army of their resources." The company was done for the night, and the archers were set about their campfires, for the most part enjoying dried meats or cheese and stolen loaves, and Hardwin had a tough stick of meat in his hand as he approached Robin. "Vintner, you want some meat?" "No, just thought you might want some company," Hardwin said, mouth stretching into a smile. Robin didn't respond. Hawkwood and Peter were with their own Vintaines this evening, but Robin wanted some peace, away from the other men. Besides, Hardwin was the man whom he trusted least of all. Hardwin ignored his incivility. "It's a lonely job, being a leader." Robin said nothing, but remained staring into the flames. He was a hard one to read. "I've led men before now. It's hard, I know, having to think of them as well as yourself, especially when you know some have been outlaw," Hardwin continued in sly, ingratiating tones. "It's hard to know who you can trust, eh? Men who were poachers, thieves, murderers, they all have to be watched, don't they?" "What is your point?" Robin asked curtly. "Nothing, just making conversation, Vintner. I can keep an eye on some of them if you want, though. I'm happy to help." "To turn spy against the others?" "That's a hard word to use for someone offering to help." "It's an easy word for someone offering to watch his comrades," Robin said, and Hardwin saw he had grown angry. Robin was still smiling with his mouth, but his eyes were cold and black. "I just thought I could be helpful to you," Hardwin said, and he put a little bite into his voice. "What does that mean?" "You know, a while ago I saw a couple in a tavern. Not a good one. It was just after Calais fell, and you know how it is. They fell into an argument. A captain called Morgan, and one other. Knives were drawn, and at the end of the evening there was only one standing. Be troublesome for some folk if that kind of story got out." Robin froze. "What of it?" "Well, I was thinking that if you wanted to reward me for my efforts, keeping that kind of story quiet, it would make me more keen to—" He was suddenly tumbled to his back, and when he tried to rise, he felt the prick of Robin's dagger at his throat. "I'll say this once, Hardwin," Robin hissed. "You won't offer to spy on my men or threaten me. If you try that again, this dagger will mark you for life. Do you understand me? I'll kill you." Hardwin smiled up at him, but without fear. If Robin had been going to injure him, he would have done so already. As it was, it made Hardwin decide immediately that he would have revenge on Robin. He would find a way to ruin this vintner. Or perhaps just kill him in his sleep. Chapter 3. It was after Vespers when it happened. Berenger had been busy working all afternoon, and when the bell tolled for the service, he stopped his work in the garden, rose stiffly, easing the tightness in his back, and made his way to the laver to wash his hands. In the room there was a long moorstone block, carefully carved into a trough, in which the monks all dipped their palms and washed hands and faces before a service. The other monks and lay brothers were already there when he arrived. The monks themselves soon finished their cleaning and trooped off to the church, while the remaining lay brothers took their positions, all silent, all reflective. It was normal. Before a service, the brothers would all be quiet as they considered their past acts, prepared themselves to speak with God, and remembered all those who required their prayers and efforts. When a space appeared, Berenger stepped forward. It was the sound of the sandal that alerted him. He heard the loud slap, too close, and automatically moved away. As he did so, the stone aimed for his head suddenly slammed into the laver with a loud crack. Mark turned to him, a sneer of rage on his face, but that soon disappeared as Berenger grabbed his wrist and punched straight to the man's chin, then to his belly, then to his eye, his fist whipping out swift and sure before Mark could respond. Finally, he slammed Mark's face onto the moorstone slab of the laver itself. Mark roared with pain, and as he did, Berenger heard two other lay brothers gasp. He turned to face them as Mark slid to the floor, his face a mess of blood, whimpering. Kenred was there, and held his hands up, retreating, shaking his head as if expecting Berenger to launch a fresh attack on him. Berenger took several breaths. Mark was whiffling through his bloody nose, and Berenger was tempted to hit him again, not because of the noise, but because Mark's action had guaranteed that Berenger's attempt to leave war and death behind him was finished. Mark had proved that no matter where Berenger went, his past, the violence of his life would always be there. He would never find peace, not even in a quiet rural abbey like Tavistock. He left the laver and walked to the daughter. There, he reached under his cot and extracted the 2 gold coins he had saved from his profits after the last chevauchée. He had wedged them into the wooden frame in case of an emergency like this. With them in his scrip, he went to the gate. The porter smiled a cheerful welcome, but his face demonstrated a slight confusion to see a lay brother leaving the abbey when a service was in progress. Berenger ignored his glance and walked from the gate with a feeling of grim misery at leaving his possible life behind. The abbey had been his salvation, or so he had hoped. Instead, he had learned it was another gathering of men, some of whom were keen to seek their own advantage at the expense of others. It was just another cockpit of conflicting ambitions and pressures. He would have none of it. If the religious world would have nothing to do with him, he would return to the secular and make the most of the life he still understood. He would return to France. There was nothing for him here. War was all he knew. There was a sudden scream from the camp followers, and Robin let go of Hardwin and hurried in the direction of the cry. There was a small group already gathered about the woman Agnes and Dogbreath. "What?" he was asking. "I was only asking her for a quick one, that's all. Dogbreath, leave her. I'm not going anywhere till she gives up that knife. She could have stabbed me." "And saved us a lot of grief if she had," Saul said lightly. "Swive a goat, you git." "Not everyone has your tastes," Ulrich said. Dogbreath glared at him, but seeing Robin, he appealed for support. "She pulled a knife on me. Could have cut off me bullocks, and all because I was..." "Spare us the details," Robin said. He glanced at the woman. Her chemise was torn, and she crouched, the centre of the company of men, her knife pointing at any man who approached. She shielded her 2 sons behind her. The younger, Artaud, was keeping up a high-pitched keening in terror, and the older was little better. Robin walked to her and motioned to the children. "You can see that they are terrified. Do you want them to see you die? If they do, they will be of little use to us. We'll have to kill them too. You know that. Give me the knife." "He tried to..." "I know what he tried to do. Give me the knife. I swear he will not try it again." "How can you stop him?" "He will do as I say," Robin said, and held his hand out for the knife. "But if you continue like this, you will die, and so will your boys. I will see you safe, but only if you give me the knife." She did not trust him. Looking around at the other faces of the men encircling her, she knew that she could trust none of them, but she had no real choice. It was a matter of losing her knife or seeing her children die. She dropped it rather than placing it in his hand. "That's better," Dogbreath said, and was about to move towards her when Robin's hand stopped him, splayed out on his breast. "I gave her my word. You will leave her alone." He raised his voice. "The same goes for all. If you have a need, use one of the other women. This one is not accustomed to us or our ways yet. Show her some respect." Dogbreath scowled. "She's only a Frenchie." "You will show her respect," Robin repeated, "or I will return her knife." November the 3rd. Agnes had held her tongue since that day she had tried to warn the man on the road, and Dogbreath tried to rape her. She had hoped that the man must be the leading member of an army, and that he might capture the English and release her and her boys. But instead, all she had achieved was to infuriate these English devils. The man called Robin had come to her, but while his eyes were usually kind, they were blazing with anger, and he'd told her that her boys would be murdered in front of her, and then she would also die if she tried anything similar. It was enough. She had no option other than to comply. She had lost her darling Pierre when he was crushed by the mill's grinding stone 2 years ago, and since then she had struggled to keep her boys fed. Any further action by her might cost both boys their lives. That much was plain. When the horrible, smelly man with the face like a wizened prune had tried to assault her, all she could do at first was scream, and then she recovered herself enough to pull her knife free. She should have killed herself to save her honor. Except her boys' lives were also at stake. And now here she was, nothing but a whore, a marching wife to any man who wanted her, while her sons would become little better than slaves to these men. She should have accepted her death, and theirs, rather than this half-life. But it was impossible. She could not bear to think of her sons being slaughtered before her. She should have found the strength to kill them, to ensure they didn't suffer, and then killed herself to save them all from this continued hell. No, she didn't have the strength to kill her boys. She must try to escape with them instead. "What's the point?" Will said as they jogged along. After meeting Adam of Barton, the company had headed southwards. It seemed likely, so Hawkwood had said, that nearer cities would have sent money more urgently, seeing the need for defence, whereas those farther distant might take longer to collect and send their taxes. With fortune, the company might discover money being sent from Toulouse or Avignon. All the cities in France were determined to defend their homes, and they would pay for their protection. Perkin shrugged. "It's as good a place as any to find money," he considered. "So far we've seen nothing, only the odd occasional nibble from unsuspecting travellers," Will grumbled. But that morning their luck was to change.